When We Disagree is a show about arguments, how we have them, why we have them, and their impact on our relationships and ourselves. We consistently underestimate how long tasks will take, and we overestimate what we can accomplish. This planning fallacy explains why projects run late, why renovations exceed budgets, and why promises get broken. In disagreements, the planning fallacy creates conflicts between optimistic promisers and frustrated promise receivers, between those who plan and those who suffer when plans fail. The planning fallacy can destroy trust in relationships. Your partner promises to be ready in 5 minutes and takes 20 or more. Your friend swears they'll help you move but shows up hours late. Your teenager insists they can finish homework in an hour, then needs 3. They're not lying. They might genuinely believe their optimistic estimates, but repeated planning failures feel like deception to those who suffer the consequences. At the workplace, the planning fallacy can create cascading failures. Marketing promises delivery dates that engineering can't meet, or managers set deadlines based on best-case scenarios, not realistic scenarios or worst-case scenarios. Teams commit to more than they can deliver. Understanding the planning fallacy improves relationships and reduces conflicts. We can add buffer time to everything. When estimating, consider our past performance and not hope for improvements. When others give estimates, maybe double them to yourself. Most importantly, recognize that planning fallacy isn't just dishonesty. It's really human. We're all pretty terrible at predicting how long things will take, and forgiving others' planning failures as you'd want yours forgiven is a decent set of advice. Better yet, plan for planning failures. I'm Michael Lee, Director of the Civility Initiative and Professor of Communication at the College of Charleston. Our guest today on When We Disagree is Andrew Perrin. Andrew is the SNF Agora Distinguished Professor of Sociology and the Chair of Sociology at Johns Hopkins University. His last book was American Democracy: From Tocqueville to Town Hall to Twitter, and he is currently working on a book about how Americans argue badly. Andrew, tell us an argument story.
Thanks so much for having me. I was trying to figure out which of a couple of interesting ones to talk to you about. I think the one that I'll maybe spend the most time on today was working with several colleagues on trying to redesign a general education curriculum for the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill, which is where I was. I was on the faculty and I led that effort in about 2016 to 2019. And as you can imagine, that's a pretty big deal for a college. It's a big deal to make a decision about what it is that all students need to know in order to graduate college. And as you can imagine, everybody's got their own idea of what's most important, what's not important, how to do it well. And so going through that process, leading that process was probably the most interesting kind of set of disagreements to talk about.
What was UNC? I'm from North Carolina, so I call it Carolina. What was Carolina shifting from and shifting to in terms of gen ed requirements?
Yeah, I mean, so Carolina had a pretty conventional gen ed requirement. We call it a checkbox or a cafeteria style curriculum, where it said basically you take a certain number of social sciences, a certain number of natural sciences, et cetera. And then a few other things have been grafted on top of that, like a requirement for a course that focused on social and ethnic diversity, stuff like that. But it was our students understood it as a series of hoops to jump through, a series of boxes to check. They did not see it as anything that was coherent or that they saw as really driving an exciting educational experience.
And so what were you going to shift it to? I mean, how do you make general education what everybody should know coherent, from the sciences to history and beyond?
Yeah, no, it's a great question. And, the main thing that we tried to do was we started at the beginning. We said, we are not going to start with, we've always done it this way. We're not going to start with our peers do it this way. We're going to start with, why should a student take a certain set of courses in order to be generally educated at Carolina? And what we ended up doing was to say, well, look, what do we want them to be? Because they've been through this process. I think both students and parents and educators want our students to be employable. We want them to be able to have good jobs and have fulfilling careers that contribute to society. We also want them to be good citizens, right? It's always been an ambition of higher ed that we are helping our students to be responsible members of the political society that they're part of. And we want them to be something that we call lifelong learners. We want them to be people who are intrinsically curious, excited to learn about the world. I think the big bet that we placed in that curriculum was we think all of these are based on the same set of skills. So instead of giving students one set of skills to be employable, another set to be good citizens, and another set to be lifelong learners, we decided we wanted to combine that into one set of skills that students would learn really well and would put them in great shape to be both employable and excellent citizens, and to have that sort of coveted intellectual style of habit of mind for them to work with.
So one way, at least the broadest possible answers to this question, what should all students know? One answer would be they should be more knowledgeable, and one answer would be they should be more skillful.
And I think what we came up with was something we called capacities, which is kind of a blend of knowledge and skills.
Mm-hmm.
But we think students ought to be able to ask really good questions, to know what the right questions are to ask. They ought to be able to assemble excellent evidence, whether that evidence is already out there or they need to gather it themselves. They should know how to analyze that evidence and make good judgments about what the answers to those questions are. And then they ought to be able to both make good judgments about what to do about it, and they ought to be able to act on it in the world, whether that means voting in a particular way, or making a particular investment decision, or making a scientific decision. Those are all ways that they act on evidence, even though evidence is usually not complete. It's always, insufficient in some way. So our big bet was that if we can get students to understand that cycle in any one of a number of different topic areas, that was going to give them the tools that they need to move forward.
So just so I have it right, the capacities you were trying to build that blur the gap between being knowledgeable and being skillful, and also perhaps maximize employability, being good citizens, loving learning, being lifelong learners, are the ability to ask good questions, to find, gather, and interpret evidence, and then to act on the basis of that interpretation. Did I miss anything?
I think that's a good summary.
Okay. How did your quest to get these enshrined in Carolina's gen ed curriculum go?
Well, ultimately the quest went great. That's effectively, that is the core of the curriculum that we ended up designing and that got adopted. So very proud of the outcome. But along the way, there was a lot of disagreement. A lot of faculty felt that we were denying the importance of their particular field. Mm-hmm. I can't tell you how many conversations I had with someone who says, it's fine for everyone else, but every student has to take history. Or right. It's fine for everyone else, but every student has got to take some chemistry, because my topic, my subject area is truly important. And so there was a lot of that, what we would call turf war. And I think partly it's genuine. Professors are trained from the beginning to think that what they're doing is really important, and they're all right. It is all really important. It's also the case that, as is true in lots of universities, money follows course registrations. And so departments have a real incentive to try to hold on to some of what they're teaching in that general education curriculum, because that's where some of their budget's coming from. So for both of those reasons, we had to go in front of people and make a case that they needed to have the conversation on the terrain of, why do our students need this? Not, is this important?
And what would you say to me? We'll role play it out. I teach ancient Greek tragedy.
So my point, and the point that I kept making time and time again, was, look, there are 36 departments and programs in the College of Arts and Sciences at Carolina. Uh, every single one of them is full of great teachers teaching really important material. So even if we were to just to require one course in every important department or program, we'd be looking at the majority of each student's full college career. So just telling me that the material is important is not adequate. The question is, what is the way that I often put it was, tell me what a student needs from your course that if they're not going to major in your course. Say
Hmm.
student's not going to be a history major, student's not going to be a chemistry major. Breaks my heart, but the student's not going to be a sociology major. What do they need coming out of that uh, coming out of that class? Why should they take it if they don't need to know the particulars of that course's content?
Hmm.
Uh, and I think people ultimately got that, right? And they said, well, look, what I can teach through chemistry is I can teach a particular analytic mindset, or I can teach a particular kind of quantitative reasoning, or I can give students the tools that they might actually use somewhere else. And that was really the gold standard for us.
Curious about the role of communication in this, and specifically building a kind of culture of argument. And so, if we're going back to the skills, we're talking about asking good questions, interpreting or finding evidence, interpreting that evidence, and acting on that basis. At what point in there is there room for rival interpretations about the questions, about the evidence, and about how to interpret that evidence? And then what should we do when we come up with inevitable disagreements about finding and interpreting evidence?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think the reality is that the evidence is never absolute or dispositive. The evidence is always tenuous,
Mm-hmm.
and so I I would say that that whole cycle that I mentioned is really about it's a big picture way of thinking about argument as the core of what students need to be able to do, again across their whole sort of adult lives. So yes, I'm not a rhetorician. I'm not an argument person per se, but I do think that what we're looking at is we're asking students to be able to do a really good job of building what they think is the best argument, and then listening to other arguments and um, pushing for their position in a good public scene.
Are there any rival conceptions of answers to the question, what should all students know, that you think have any merit compared to this one?
Um, I mean, look, I think I'm kind of a pluralistic kind of guy. I think a lot of them have lots of merit. The other two big competing styles of curricula are, number one, the open curriculum basically says let students choose whatever they want to take,
Uh-huh.
um, and number two, the what you might call a core curriculum. All students should have to read a particular set of texts. They should be subject to particular,
Right.
say, knowledge of the founding of the American Republic. Um, uh, particular sets of knowledge that they should have.
Some kinds of specialization, perhaps.
Yeah, I mean, I'm very involved in a pretty pluralistic group of folks working on a question of civic thought in the academy. That's like, what does it mean to do a good job of teaching students to be good citizens? And there's certainly a faction in that coalition that thinks that what we need to make sure we do is, students need to read the Federalist Papers and the Declaration of Independence, and they need to read some Hobbes and some Locke, and they've got to have this kind of philosophical slash documentary knowledge. Um, I'm not against that. I think I teach those texts in my classes too. I think they're valuable. I think it's important, but I think they're important because they provide the stuff out of which a good argument is made. So I think they're only valuable insofar as they help students do something in the world.
Could you teach those, or chemistry or ancient Greek history, in a way that was specifically married to these four skill set outcomes?
Absolutely, yes, yes. In fact, I would say, like, when I teach my first year seminar, that's exactly what I do. We read all those documents, but we read those documents in a way that's not, you know, memorize what they say or why they said it, but what's the role that they played in trying to convince people or in building a case for a strong democratic foundation.
So you say, okay, tomorrow the University of North Carolina switches to this curriculum that you have established. How do you then teach other professors to teach in a way that gets to these skills and not in the ways that they've been accustomed to?
I actually think that's much easier than you might think. And the reason I think that it's easier is that that when professors are doing what they're trained to do in their research lives, in their discovery of knowledge lives, they're engaged in this same basic process. And so the main thing that the main shift we're asking professors to do is to teach more about how we know stuff than what we know. But professors are in great shape. That's what they spent their PhD years doing.
There's this larger argument about the role of the university here too, both universities as they face students and universities as they face societies. There's this argument that universities can be about one of two things, and this is a reductive claim often attributed to Jonathan Haidt, but I'll make it here and see what your reaction is that the university can be about pursuing truth or it can be about pursuing justice. If I'm reading the skill set that the curriculum that you helped design at University of North Carolina is trending towards, it's more about the former. It's more about truth seeking and less about justice.
I would say that's definitely right, but I don't really buy the strong distinction.
Okay, go ahead.
Between the two. I don't think that the job of a university, or certainly of the educational side of a university, is to tell students what is more and less just. But I think it's entirely appropriate for us to give students the tools for them both to figure out what they think is more and less just, or what's likely to give rise to more and less just outcomes. And I think it's totally appropriate for us to give them the tools to act on that themselves, right? So, if we've given them the tools to understand how society works, understand how justice movements might work, and how to make a really good argument in public, like, they can use that to pursue justice. That's up to them. I think our job as a university is to give them the tools to figure all that out. So I do think it's more on the former, on the side of the search for truth, but I don't really buy the strong distinction.
Yeah. To what extent are you evangelizing on behalf of this model for all colleges and universities in the United States? Obviously, you've moved on from North Carolina and now at Johns Hopkins. To what extent does your quest to redesign curricula, general education curricula around these skills continue?
So I don't know that I would call it my core quest. I have done a bunch of work trying to help other institutions that are going through similar processes. Just, I think, for good reason, the Carolina redesign process was seen as both innovative and successful, and so a lot of other institutions, UCLA, Michigan State, Auburn, UIC, I don't know, I'm forgetting a couple of others, Purdue, have all been, sort of come to me or to others who involved in this and said, can you help us think this through? And I've done a little bit of writing about that as well. But I'm not so much an evangelist for the gen ed model, although I think it's good, as I am for being really thoughtful about the role that our university is supposed to be playing in society and trying to make us live up to that as much as possible. So I've been doing a bunch of this work with folks trying to design civic thought initiatives within universities, a bunch of work trying to survey students as to their experiences with free speech and self-censorship in the classroom, so that we can hold ourselves to account as professors and as universities. Are we really doing what we ought to be doing?
Andrew Perrin, thank you so much for being on When We Disagree.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
When We Disagree is recorded at the College of Charleston with creator and host Michael Lee. Recording and sound engineering by Jesse Kunz and Lance Laidlaw. Reach out to us at whenwedisagree@gmail.com.